A little bit about me. I am a graduate student here in my last semester in environmental science. If you're curious about my research, it's about insects and their ability to break down plastics. I'd be more than happy to talk about that after the workshop if you're curious and want to know more. And like I said, I work for health promotion, which ties into self-care. As we go through this workshop, I would love for this to be as interactive as possible. I know we're kind of scattered all in the back half of the room, but I'm going to be asking some questions and things like that as we go through. So your thoughts and opinions or different things like that are very much appreciated. So skip that. We're going to start with a real simple question here. What is self-care? How would we define self-care? Yeah, go ahead.
Just kind of making sure, just checking in with yourself that you're all right, both mentally and physically.
Yeah, definitely, right? Checking with yourself mentally and physically. Any other thoughts around that? What do we think?
Making yourself a priority.
Making yourself a priority. Yeah, I agree with that. What are some other things we can think of? Yeah, go ahead.
Doing things that you enjoy just because you enjoy doing them.
Yeah, definitely, right? Doing things you enjoy because you enjoy them, right? I think that's a great way of stating it as well. We'll get into a definition here in a second. The next question, do we need it? Do you think we need self-care? This could be a simple yes or no.
Yes.
Yes.
Cool, right? Mostly across the board. I think everybody gave me a thumbs up or said yes or no. Next question, when do we need it? What are some times we think that we need self-care? Yeah, go ahead.
When there's just like times in your life where everything's just where everything's just super stressful, that sometimes you just need to like just detach yourself from it for at least just a day and then just come back.
Yeah, so basically in stressful times, what you're saying is trying to apply self-care during that, like put a little break in that. Yeah, I think it's a good way to look at it. What are some other thoughts? Yeah.
When you like finish all your work, you use that like incentive.
Yeah.
That was your relaxing place.
Exactly, right? So it's kind of that like reward after you finish all your work, right? That's what you're getting at.
Yeah.
Yeah, that can definitely be the kind of the when. Any other ideas on the when that we can think of?
On like good days too, it doesn't just have to be like a bad day or a stressful time. It can be like any time.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well, right? Using self-care kind of every day or integrated into your daily life all the time rather than just at, oh, I'm stressed out and need self-care, right? Maybe it's a habitual thing that you can incorporate in. So I think our first idea on self-care was pretty close to the definition that we have here. Obviously, this is a broad definition. It's not going to be 100% all-encompassing. And it's basically just self-care includes any intentional action you take to care for your physical, mental, and emotional health. So we're going to start talking about what does that actually mean, what does that look like as we go through this. We're going to do a quick little activity. We can do it as a full group here. This idea of, is it self-care? And this can be yes and no, and I'll ask for a bit further. You can also be in the middle and say, I don't know. Eating ice cream. What do we think? Yay or nay? We can do thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yay.
Okay, so most of us are yes. I see one maybe in the middle, right? So for those of you who say this is yes, this is self-care, if you had to justify this to somebody, how would you justify this is self-care?
Because it's ice cream.
Okay. Yeah, right? That's one way of looking at it. What are some other ways you justify it? What if somebody presses you, they're like, okay, yeah, it's ice cream, but
it promotes happiness.
It promotes happiness, okay, yeah, right? Eating ice cream generally makes us happy. For, you were in the middle, right? Why'd you say maybe?
I don't know, I just feel like there could be healthier alternatives, you know, just in multiple different ways.
Okay, yeah, your hand is in the back.
I think it's like, well, it might make you happy in the moment, and you might like face the bad parts of it later. Like you might get stomach ache or like too much of it, it might be bad for your health.
Okay, yeah, you raised some good points, right? Is having ice cream every day good for us? What do we think?
Depends on how much.
Okay, depends on how much, right? Maybe for some of us it doesn't fit into our regimen. Most of us are in agreement though, right? This one's not super controversial, but there is some level of maybe it depends, right? Next example here is napping, right? Again, thumbs up, thumbs down, what do we think? Is it self-care? I'm seeing mostly thumbs up, some in the middle. So for those of you that are thumbs up, what's your justification of why napping is good? Yeah, go ahead.
Because sometimes, like when you're just doing a lot of homework, you just need to like just turn off your brain for like just 30 minutes and just relax for a bit and just be like, is everything alright?
Yeah.
Lay in bed for 3 minutes.
Yeah, that's a good way to explain it, right? There's a time element associated with it as well. What are some other justifications that we can think of? Is there anything we want to add to that?
Sometimes you're just tired, you need a power nap.
Yeah, sometimes you're tired and just need a power nap, right? Again, kind of a time element associated with it. For the couple of you that were in the middle, what's your justification? Like, it depends. I think you were, yeah.
Sometimes it can be like a form of avoidance, like something stressful comes up and snap.
Yeah.
Instead of like trying to deal with the thing.
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is basically there's some beneficial times, but it could also be this form of avoidance, right? Of, okay, I'm gonna sleep so I don't have to deal with this thing. And I think you were also in the middle as well.
Yeah, for me it's like, I think napping is good when your body needs the sleep, but sometimes you can get in the habit of like napping every day in the afternoon, and after a while it's like, starts to kind of mess up your schedule. I feel like I'm just doing too much.
Yeah, so it could mess up your schedule. Maybe you're referring to sleep schedule as well with that. Do we think there's a right time in the day to nap? Yeah, go ahead.
Probably like after you finish like the bulk of your classwork, and probably like around like 2-3 p.m. if you don't have like any classes, and you probably have like a lot of morning classes. That would be like the best time to like take like a 30-hour minute nap.
Gotcha, right? So again, the time element there, 30-hour minute nap, also maybe afternoon. Do any of us think like nighttime naps, you know, like a quick little power nap at like 6 or 7 p.m. is useful? I'm seeing some people saying yeah, right?
Depends on the schedule.
Yeah, it depends on your schedule. How many of you like taking naps that are longer than maybe like the power nap, right? How many of us are in like the 2 to 3 hour nap club? Okay. Yeah, so maybe like a third of us in this room right now. Right, so there's differences between that. I'll touch on all of these on the end and give kind of my answers as we go through, right? But there's some variation here with napping. What about partying or going to a concert or anything of that kind of like realm, or music, dancing, and stuff associated? What do we think? Self-care, yay or nay? I'm seeing thumbs up in the middle, nobody straight down, I don't think. Okay, so let's start with, again, thumbs up, right? What's the rationale here? How do you justify this?
It's a form of play for some people.
It's a form of play for some people? 100%, right? You have to go out and enjoy yourself. You're gonna go dance, listen to some music, right? Hang out with people. Definitely. Any other people burning desire to justify why partying or going to a concert is a form of self-care? Yeah, go ahead.
It's just important to socialize.
It's important to socialize, definitely. I think it's a really important point, right? There's a lot of benefits to come from it, right? Whether it be a small party, big gathering, going to a concert, you're going generally with people, or you're gonna meet people there, you socialize with random people, what have you. For those of us in the middle, right, why were we kind of on the fence? Yeah, go ahead.
Again, it depends on what you're doing. If you're just socializing, maybe you just, take a few sips, everything's fine. But if you're just there, you just get like absolutely just gone, then I feel like at that point you're just kind of running away from life.
Yeah, okay, so maybe that idea of avoidance again, right, in the use of substances, like using substances to avoid in that venue. You also had your hand up, yeah.
I was was just gonna say like the population or being in a crowded area. I really feel like physically and emotionally you really wouldn't correlate with that, but maybe mentally it's something that people really like doing to where they want to go and escape doing that.
Yeah.
But like I feel like physically and emotionally just like obviously it's conscious, so like being surrounded by a lot of people and things like that, it's not really, you know, self-care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of get where you're coming from, right? This idea of like, it might touch on one of the things of self-care, but it doesn't touch on all of them. So it's kind of potentially beneficial in one way, but maybe it drains your energy in another way, right? Like physically draining, or maybe emotionally draining, and things like that. Right. Any other thoughts we want to add to this? Cool, I'm going to put up the next two together because these usually are pretty thought-provoking in the sense of reading or going on hikes. What do we think? Self-care, yay or nay? Yeah, right, mostly across the board from everybody, right? Hikes usually have a really good connotation. You're out in nature, you're hiking, like it's like, oh yeah, that's a great thing to go do, right? Same thing with reading. People are like, reading is productive, right? It's something productive to do. You're learning, you're doing all these different things. There's a lot of like good words associated with reading. And I point those out specifically because the next example here is video games. What do we think? Form of self-care, yay or nay?
Yes.
All right, so I'm getting thumbs up. I see at least one or two thumbs down, kind of in the middle. So let's start with the positive rationale of the why. Yeah, go ahead.
I guess for me, like, one of the best things to do after like a really long week is to just go out into like nature with a few of your friends and just explore. Just walk the trails and just get a top, walk over the view, eat a lunch.
Yeah, right. I was asking about video games, but I think that's still that's good justification for nature. Yeah, let's go here.
I would say kind of like in the same sense that people love like reading books or going out in nature and the different characteristics and aspects that come with it.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like personally for me, like how the way I like it with video games is like playing football.
Yeah.
And like my schedule and how busy it is. So it's like when people have really busy schedules, like when they do have their free time, like a lot of people do like reading books and things like that. So I feel like video games, it's still like something you can do to collaborate with people.
Mm-hmm.
You can also do it by yourself, and I feel like it's also some a form of play. So.
Yeah, so this idea of formal play, potential socialization, or like a kind of de-stressor, right? Just kind of solo playing or things like that, right? So, right, those are all I think like pretty good ways of benefits. For those of us that were either in the middle or on the negative aspect of it, what's our rationale there? Why would we say that? Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's like there can be benefits in moderation, but too much of it, it's like it has really addictive traits to it. Like this sort of like easy dopamine rush you get from it. I feel like it can have really bad consequences if you start spending too much time with it.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So talking about the potential addictive nature of using it as a form of self-care, or just in general, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Just like the time spent on it can be detrimental, maybe. But for the positive side, it's not video games are not just like you think of like violent video games or whatever. Like I personally play a lot of puzzle games.
Yeah.
They actually force you to think, and you're still being productive, like more so than just watching TV or something. So they have both pros and cons.
Yeah, right. So kind of being in the middle there, right? Depending on what game it is, maybe it's beneficial versus maybe some negative aspects, right? Like really common game that I like to point out is Minecraft, right? Pretty like serene in general. You build stuff, maybe it causes you to think, lots of kids play it. Parents kind of see it like, yeah, it's like video game Legos, right? So maybe it's not real world productive, but you can still gain skills from it. Right? So with all these, I think kind of the general point of this is, to some degree, and you guys touched on it, I'm just gonna kind of pull these things out, right? So with sleep, we talked about time of sleep, this idea of power naps, maybe depending on time of day. There's a lot of research to back up napping that says, one, if you nap too late in the day and for too long of a period, it can mess up your sleep schedule, right? Your sleep cycle and everything screws with REM and all these different things, and so it kind of can mess with that, right? So, and the same thing with the avoidance, right? A lot of people sleep to avoid different things. Oftentimes, excessive sleeping is tied in with depressive or anxiety disorders. Sleeping can be like a symptom of something deeper, right? Not saying that that's always the case, but it's potential, right? Same thing with reading, right? This can also have, like, this is generally a positive outlet from a lot of people. It's like, oh, you're reading. But what if you're reading, like, gossip magazines that are about, you know, our Brad Pitt and whatever, you know, back together, right? I didn't specify the type of it. It's a novel depicted here, right? So we have this idea of like, oh, if you're reading literature, then you're, you know, being productive. But reading something like gossip, maybe that's not as productive, right? Or maybe you're reading comic books. A lot of people look down on comic book reading. Comes to the same idea of video games, that there's a lot of social perceptions around it of like, what's productive, what's beneficial, what's good for you. And I think the bottom line to try and touch on here is it all depends. It depends on the amount of time spent, how it fits in with your life, what type of enjoyment you get out of it. We know video games can be super addictive. You can spend long hours. Maybe spending every weekend only playing video games is a really unhealthy habit because you're not doing anything productive, you're avoiding things. It could be the same thing for reading. It could be the same thing if every weekend you go camping to escape the world. You're saying, I don't want to be in society, I want to go be out in nature all weekend, and yeah, I have these 4 homework assignments to do, but you know what, I'll just do those Monday morning before my classes and things like that, right? This whole idea of it depends, and that's kind of where we get into this, when we're talking about self-care, is that it can really depend on the where, when, what, and kind of how, right? And the why behind it as well. And so I'm going to kind of segue into talking about this idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Have any of us seen this before? Some of us, okay, so we're kind of familiar with the basic concept around here, is that there's this idea that we need to have our basic needs met and our psychological needs met before we can get to this self-fulfillment needs, right? These building blocks of going up. There's a lot of different discourse that can come around this concept of ideas that we can really dive into, and I'm sure in some of your classes, if you've heard of these things, you can dive into, right? Like there's certain subtypes of people where it's like, you might not have your safety needs met from a family safety perspective, but you can still, you know, participate in sports. I think a really great example is if you look at some of the sports movies that have come out recently, in the past, let's say like 10 to 15 years. The one I'm thinking of is one of the cross-country ones where it's based in, I think it's in California or something around there. Team of cross-country runners where they struggle with the family life and things like that because they're of immigrant status. And they're worried about their parents being deported or themselves being deported, right? There's this idea that safety is lacking, but they can have all of these other things, right? They have food, maybe, water, like all these different things, right? And it can touch on all these things, but it can still get to this self-actualization, this self-fulfillment, right? That's just one example. There's a whole bunch to really dive into. The basic concept is, if we can get our basic needs met and our psychological needs met, oftentimes it's easier to reach these self-fulfillment, right? Again, this idea of building blocks up. And like I said, it's not always achievable. Everybody's life circumstances are different. But just something to consider as we keep going through this conversation as a self-check of, am I meeting these different things to get there, right? Or am I missing one of these? Have you heard of the Yorkscotsman Curve before?
I seen it on a video, but not this exact rap, but I did see a video where the guy actually talks about this, and he said like, how like a certain amount of stress is good, but when you start getting too much is when you're just pushing, just like when you're just like being less and less productive, and that like there's just like a peak like state of stress and performance. Yeah, right. That's basically a great way to describe it. Is you have this bell curve, right? And this is the labeled healthy, focused, motivated levels of stress, and then as your stress level increases, it's over here is when we get into this fatigue or exhaustion, panic, and anxiety, or prolonged stress can lead to disease. So there's a couple of different types of stress. Granted, our body isn't great at telling the difference between the two, but we have eustress, which is this idea of good stress, and then we have distress, which is this idea of bad stress, right?
And some of those things can be something as simple as like, you have a puppy or a kitten, it's stressful because you have to keep them alive, they chew things up, but like it's a generally positive experience for the most part, right? You have this fun, cuddly, loving animal. Maybe it's going on a trip, it can be stressful flying or driving. And then you have other things that we say are like, oh yeah, that's super like on the negative side of stress, where we talk about you failed an exam, or you have an exam in a super hard class coming up, and you're studying a lot and you didn't do as well as you wanted, right? We get into these like ideas of negative self-talk or something like that. Maybe it's arguments with loved ones that can cause a lot of stress that don't really have this positive outcome. Our bodies aren't super great at telling the difference. So basically, any amounts of stress that we have can build up and can lead into this area over here, right? Ideally, we want to be in this, healthy tension, motivated, focused area, this like optimum stress. It's really hard to be like, I'm going to be here all the time. You can't you can say that, you can set that goal for yourself, but there's some things that we have to do to actually get there. And I also want to point out too, we can be here in the morning and here by the evening. We can start here in the morning and be here by the evening. You wake up, you have a bunch to do, you're super stressed out about it, you get it all done, you can relax, right? That's your reward after. You're like, cool, I can relax, I'm good, I'm caught up on everything. There's the reverse. You wake up and you only have a couple of things to do. You go through your classes for the day, and the professor dumps 3 or 4 essays on you, and it's like, oh shoot, didn't realize this was going up in the syllabus. Maybe a professor's like, hey, pop quiz, right? All these different things that can just add to our stress level. So it's just kind of just we personally fluctuate between this throughout the day, every week, every month, etc. I'm going to throw some statistics at you. We'll get back to that question of what's causing us stress right now. But we'll throw some statistics. This is from 2018 NCHA data. It was a poll of WSU students. And they asked this basic question. In the past academic year, have you felt any of the following not from physical activity? And 86% of students said that they felt overwhelmed. 84% reported feeling exhausted. 54% difficulty with academics. 58% overwhelming stress. And 61% overwhelming anxiety. These numbers aren't mutually exclusive. These numbers add up to more than 100%, so you can feel overwhelming stress and have difficulty with academics, right? Things can be correlated with each other. These numbers are from 2018, it's 4 years ago. Data's a little bit old. Unfortunately, they haven't done a pandemic study asking this same question. They're hopefully going to ask one in 2023, so if you're still around and you're curious to see how the student body is kind of in a hopefully post-pandemic world, it'll be really interesting to see that. Anecdotally, based off of all my experiences working with students, we're probably at these exact same levels, if not higher, across the board, right? Talking about difficulty with academics when it comes to, one, getting sick with COVID and the stress that's associated with that from missing class over this last year. Same thing with Zoom University, right? Class over Zoom was really challenging for a lot of people. And just this whole general state of the world across the board, it just causes this overwhelmed and feeling exhausted across most of the student body that I've interacted with. So I would say pretty likely these numbers are the same, if not higher, because of all of the cascading effects that have been happening over the past 2 years of the pandemic and all the other things that go on in the world, right?
So did they not do the survey this last couple of years?
They did in 2020, and they didn't ask this question. And the one that they did in 2020 was 2 months before the pandemic. So none of the data is super relevant. I've looked at it, and we can pull out similar data to this, and the numbers are pretty close to the same. And they haven't done one in 21 or 22. So they said 2023. They also said in 2021 that they were going to do it in 2022. So we'll see if it happens and gets there. I'm going to have us pair up real quickly, and I want to go through these questions. So talk about some experience of stress. What are some of the physical symptoms, mental symptoms, emotional symptoms, or behaviors that happen when you're stressed. We can just go into pairs of 2, I think should be good. There might be 1 or 2 groups of 3, but just as long as you're discussing with your group, and then we'll come back as a big group and point out a couple of things that are common across the board. So what are some of the things that we talked about? We can start at the top of the list here of physical symptoms, but what are some of the things that came up in terms of physical symptoms? Yeah, go ahead.
Like increased heart rate.
Increased heart rate? Yeah, it's a good one. What else?
Headaches.
Headaches? Yeah, definitely.
Just paralyzation, kind of just.
Yeah.
Paralysis.
It's more derived from mental, but you just feel like you just can't do anything.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
You get like shaky or jittery.
Shaky or jittery.
Sweaty.
Yeah, sweaty palms. Yeah.
Just feeling tired.
Tired. Uh-huh. Yeah, it's a good list of physical symptoms, right? What about mental symptoms? Yeah.
You just feel like your brain is being bombarded by everything, and you just can't like just focus on everything.
Yeah, so just racing thoughts, like that kind of just constant train where it's maybe hard to focus on one thing, because like you said, just being bombarded by stuff.
Something that might take like 30 minutes might take you like an hour and a half when you have like a lot of mental stress, because you're just not thinking straight sometimes.
Yeah, so this idea of like brain fog, or kind of feeling like cloudy or hard to really focus. Yeah, I think that's really good. Those are some good examples. What about emotional? What are some of our emotions associated with stress? Yeah.
Sometimes you just break down mentally.
Yeah, right? Break down, whether that's like probably crying or just unable to like process anything. Or some other things, yeah.
Super irritated when stressed.
Super irritated, yeah, being just angry at people or whatever, yeah.
Feeling like heightened emotions or like lessened emotions.
Okay, so kind of pretty dichotomous, either being like super like really feeling all of the emotions or certain emotions, or not feeling really anything at all, kind of just being meh about the world. Anything else we want to add to this? I think those are all good examples. So how do these all play into our behaviors, right? How do we feel like we act when we're stressed?
It kind of just becomes a bit like unpredictable. Like we just can't. It's like kind of like we lose control of ourselves in a sense when we're stressed.
Yeah, being unpredictable, right? Yeah, go ahead.
I get in a bad mood and lazy. Probably not much fun to be around.
Yeah, so just kind of being like a grump, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's like, oh, you're a big grump, right? That kind of like general mood. Yeah.
Being less social.
Being less social, okay, so isolating, basically.
Yeah, just running away from everybody.
Yeah. Anything else we haven't touched on yet that we want to point out? Cool, across the board, I think you guys covered a good span of it, right? There's all these different symptoms, things that we can start recognizing of, oh, when I'm stressed out, I get headaches, or maybe I get that faster heart rate, or can't feel emotions, or being super irritated, right? Or kind of, all these different types of moods or other things that can tie into that. Sometimes it's good to recognize that you're stressed out by looking at some of the physical symptoms that can happen. I think one of the easiest ways a lot of us can do it is more on the physical side, like, oh, we're feeling these physical symptoms that might be a sign that we're stressed out, even if our brain isn't there. Sometimes the emotional stuff, it's like, I don't know why I'm feeling this way, but I am feeling this way. Like, you just wake up, you're irritated, right? So all these different things. So it's like, this is understanding of, okay, cool, we have these different behaviors when we're stressed. What are some ways you can think of right now where you can maybe mitigate some of these things in terms of your behavior or how you act towards others when you are stressed out? What are some ways we can think of? Yeah,
I feel like it definitely just takes it to the point where you're tearing yourself, where you're at the point where you start noticing that you just can't do anything. Just pause.
Yeah.
Take a minute. Get some help.
Yeah, go ahead.
Exercise can help relieve stress.
Yeah, exercise,
Like
definitely.
outside.
Yeah, Yeah, go ahead.
I personally, I like to like grunt a lot when I'm like doing my homework. If I'm like, just to like get through it and like get it out like kind of and just like over and over again and like, I don't know, it just helps me just like get it over with.
Yeah, I think I haven't heard that one before, but I mean, it's pretty common that, you know, getting frustration out in any type of form can be beneficial, right? So we're gonna start going through some of, we covered this a bit already, just to recap. We're gonna go over some of the ways to manage our stress as well, right? But it's like this idea that self-care can help with stress. So when we're talking about, we're starting to notice some of those negative symptoms, turning to self-care. And this idea, and you mentioned it earlier, that self-care shouldn't just be reserved for these times of high stress or these negative periods. It's got to be this preventative and reactive, right? And I don't know if any of you watched The Big Bang Theory, right?
Oh, I watched all of that.
Right, so you get the reference there. But I'm going to skip through this real quick, and I'm going to start talking about this idea, right? When we're talking about being preventive and reactive to stress in our ideas of self-care, right? We often turn to self-care. We went over a number of different ways that we already turn to self-care. And so when we're talking about self-care, as you can see here, the main thing is this idea of this trigger stress reward. We have some of the more addictive things up on here, like drinking or online shopping, unhealthy foods, money, things associated with that, right? But it's going to be something as simple as we talked about earlier. Maybe it's video games, maybe it's reading, maybe it's exercise, right? All these different things can lead into this concept and this idea of addictive behavior, because what our bodies like to do is we have some trigger, we have some stress, and that leads to us trying to turn to self-care as this idea of a reward. And that reward can feed back into itself of causing more stress. And that's because our body wants, when we're talking about like the dopamine effect or like the feel-good effect of these things, our body's like, how can I get more of that? And if it knows that stress, and your body will produce stress, right, it can lead back into this kind of positive feedback loop where these things can just feed upon each other. So when we talk about this concept, right, of understanding, okay, there is this trigger reward, or there's this trigger reward idea related around stress, right? Some of the addictive things are up here because it can be really easy, and this is clinically what's studied often when we're talking about trigger rewards related with stress, right? These things like unhealthy foods, online shopping, drinking, a lot of these things have been studied pretty extensively, but it extends beyond this. And so we're talking about this idea of being both preventative and reactive. We want to make sure that we have things that are habitually in, so that our body isn't reliant on having these methods of self-care to try and then balance that out. So we talk about things like exercise, I think is a great example of it. People have an exercise regimen. I play ultimate frisbee. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday I go out for 2 hours, run around, and like that's a form of self-care for me. It's this exercise. It helps me de-stress, get the anger out, whatever, right? And it's this this pattern that I do, and habitual thing that I do. So when I do get super stressed out, it's not I need to go exercise for 7 hours to get all of this stress out, right? There doesn't have to be a big jump. It's like, no, I know I'm gonna go exercise for 2 hours. I know that it helps keep me in a healthy balance. That's gonna be good, and I'm gonna be fine there, right? Oftentimes when we think about times when we get super stressed, right, and I think video games or reading or sleeping are all great examples of that are super easy tropes to fall into is, okay, I'm stressed out, I'm gonna relax. Okay, I'm gonna watch one episode of Netflix show. You binge the whole series because you're putting stuff off, you're stressed out, it makes you feel good. And then you're like, shoot, it's 2 a.m., I just watched the whole thing, now you feel worse, now you feel more stressed because you just wasted all of that time. You felt really good during that generally, right? That kind of like pushing it out. And it can happen repeatedly where it's like, well, you know what, I felt pretty good watching 4 hours. Like, yeah, I was more stressed out, but like your body wants to go watch more. Right? Your brain's telling your body like, yeah, let's watch more TV because that makes us feel good. right? So that's what I'm saying in this concept of preventative and reactive. Obviously some examples are more extreme than others. We're gonna skip this. We're gonna talk about sleep. Because sleep is really important when it comes to this idea of self-care, as well as understanding how stress can affect sleep. So we have kind of the important things around sleep is this idea of hitting the stage 3 and 4. It's this deepest and most restorative tissue growth, repair, hormone release, energy restoration. So it's very important to hit these bottoms, right? Get all the way down to stage 3 and 4. You can see it's kind of a step down. Then we have REM, right? And basically REM is energy to your brain and body, cognitive and physical performance. REM is super important. Probably one of the things that you've heard most about sleep is like, oh yeah, REM. We all know what REM is, or we've at least heard of it, right? And so the next slide here is going to say alcohol on here, but alcohol, THC, stress, other things like that all have really similar effects in how they actually affect sleep. And so basically what it does is they all cause shortened time to fall asleep and to get down into these, which might seem super good, right? So basically the transition from wakefulness to sleep is much faster. There's a lot of nuance here of why this is not fantastic for us, but if you want to dive into the research around sleep, be my guest. I have resources I can pass on as well if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty. But basically, what this does is it causes you to miss 2 of your REM cycles in the 2 to 4 hour kind of period, right, where we usually hit our REM cycles. REM is really important, right, that we talked about for the cognitive ability of our brain and our body. So missing REM is absolutely fantastic. And then same thing, towards this latter half, we're getting more wakeful, where we're kind of in that stage of REM and being awake, kind of that like conscious sleeping. If you probably understand what I'm talking about, kind of like when you first wake up or you're like almost awake, you kind of know that you're awake, but you're still a little bit asleep. It's kind of in that realm of that boundary. And that happens usually around this like 5 to 6 hours. So you don't get super restful sleep for this last part, and it disturbs REM and can increase daytime sleepiness and all these other things associated, right? I know it says alcohol up here, THC, stress, all of these other things are pretty closely related with each other, and they all have very, very similar effects. There is nuance, but the nuance is more for if you're curious about the research of diving into how it affects. But the bottom line is that all these different things do affect stress, right? Do affect sleep. So this concept, I know it's a little bit hard to see, but this concept of leave me alone and being alone. So it's depicted in images here, hopefully to help make it a bit more clear. This idea of somebody relaxed on a kayak in a beautiful lake out in nature is this concept of being alone. You're okay to be alone. You maybe choose to go be alone. It's a time where you just want time to yourself, to relax, to rest. It's not a pushing people away idea, right? It's just, like I said, it's this, yeah, I'm going to choose to go to this beautiful place and relax. Versus leave me alone is this concept of feeling isolated, pushing people away, right? Burying your head in the sand, right? Like an ostrich, right? That idea of just trying to hide from the world. Those are two very different concepts when it comes to being alone. There's nothing inherently wrong with being alone. It's okay to be alone and to process whatever. What I'm trying to point out here is what type of alone is it? Is it a choice of an alone where you need that recharge and that want? Or is it the, I'm in a bad mood, I'm stressed out, I can't handle stuff, let me push everybody away, I just want to hide away from the world? Two very different concepts. Do you understand kind of the difference between those? Does anyone want me to clarify that more? Cool. So how can we incorporate self-care into our lives, right? We've talked about different things that affect us, mainly stress, different types of potential self-care, but how can we actively do it, right? How can we make these changes to our life if we want to make these changes? And one of the ways is through this concept of practicing mindfulness. So this is kind of a, like I said, a broad definition here. Quality or state of being conscious or aware of something. Meditation, connecting with nature, journaling, right? There's probably a bunch of different examples you can say that are mindful. I'm going to give you another sports example of how mindfulness can be applied to sports. I play open frisbee. When I go, I try to not think about all of the other things that are on my plate. When I go, I'm there, I'm focused on that, I'm focused on different frisbee things, the people there. I'm trying to experience everything by being in that moment, by being in that little 2-hour section I've carved out for myself to do that, right? That's a way of being mindful. Mindful doesn't have to be this, oh, I'm going to think about nothing and meditate and be a Buddhist monk that lives in the forest, right? That's what a lot of us think of when we hear this term mindful or meditation, is this concept of, okay, I have to sit and I have to think of nothing, and if I don't, I fail. That's a complete, misconception of that. How many of you have ever actually thought of nothing?
That's impossible.
Right? I've had one person ever tell me yes, and that's because they said they were extremely stoned out of their mind, and they don't remember having a thought. That's the only time I've ever had somebody say yes, right? But on a general level, we're probably not there, and that's not something as a professional I can recommend. But that is something that, we all have this idea of okay, to meditate, I've got to think of nothing. It's almost impossible, right? I would say realistically impossible across the board. We always have some types of thoughts. And it's okay to go with those thoughts. If you do want to sit and be like, okay, I am going to meditate, sit in your thoughts wherever they go. It doesn't really matter. It's a time for you to maybe self-reflect or just think about different things. It can be 30 seconds, it can be a minute, it can be an hour. It doesn't matter, right? You're choosing at that moment to say, hey, I want to be present, I want to be mindful of my surroundings, I want to be mindful of my thoughts for a short little period of time. Right? Different things like connecting with nature or journaling are a lot more easy to think about. Because it's oh, I'm going to go on a hike with my friends, I'm going to go camping. Maybe it's journaling, I'm going to put my thoughts pen on paper. All of these different concepts are a little bit easier to grasp. And they all have the same kind of idea, is that you're trying to focus on where you are at that moment and not necessarily think about all these other things. And there's some really, really cool research around this. If any of you are psych majors or anything in that related field, you can dive into. And it's this concept that our brains are actually really easy to trick. And we, with our thoughts, can trick our brains to think about different things that will have effects on our body. So I'm going to give you an example. I want you to think about something that is that question that I had up earlier. What is causing you stress? I want you to think about it, and I want you to put it as a front of your mind, just right here. One thing that's causing you stress. Cool. Probably all think of something super quickly. Now I want to take you on a very obscure example and scenario that will hopefully help demonstrate my point here. How many of us know what mac and cheese being stirred in a bowl sounds like? Can we all imagine the sound of mac and cheese in a metal bowl, where we've put in the cheese powder or the Velveeta cheese, whatever, and you have that slop of sound as you're mixing this bowl of mac and cheese together, right? And let's say you want to be even more descriptive here, and you're really looking forward to the smell, the taste of mac and cheese. Maybe there's some salt and pepper in there, right? And you're just stirring it around, really mixing everything in, making sure the cheese and the butter and all these different things are there, right? And you just hear that continuous sound of it being stirred. And then you take a metal bowl, because you're trying to be environmentally friendly, and you have a metal fork as well. and you slop out the mac and cheese into that metal bowl. And you have a good serving, you can the smell, the steam coming off of it, all these wonderful things that are associated with it. And as you go to take your bite of mac and cheese, your metal fork scrapes down the side of the metal bowl, that metal on metal sound. You go and you take a bite, and you know when people bite the metal fork as they pull out? That's what you do. You bite the metal fork and pull it together, teeth on metal sound. Okay. Very visceral sound, all things we can imagine in our head, in our brain. Right? We've all had that experience of mac and cheese, and we can picture those things. Many of you might have seen it, heard it, thought of the vine that's associated with it, or other things like that, right? My point is, how many of you momentarily forgot about the thing that I asked you that you were stressed about? Okay, right? Maybe about half of you. It doesn't always work, right? Sometimes it's harder to connect with that. My point is, you forgot about it momentarily. Your brain said, what the heck is this guy out here talking about mac and cheese and the sound of mac and cheese in this metal bowl? This is really weird. How does it relate, right? Like I said, it's this concept that you can trick your brain to thinking about something else. So if you can find things that are easy for you to think about, to imagine, imagery, sounds, maybe it's a card game that you like, maybe it's a, you're building a car or something, whatever, that you can say, this is not stressful to me, this is something enjoyable, this is something that I like, this is something that I find funny or humorous. Can I tell my brain and try and focus on things for a little bit? Because what that does is when you can distract your brain from this stress, means you can reduce your heart rate, your shoulders will lower, some of the tension gets released. All these different things about trying to trick our brain into thinking about something else. Like I said, there's some really cool research on this if you want to dive into it. It's mind-blowing. I think it's absolutely fantastic. If you're curious, you can always reach out through your professor or the email that I throw over to them. If you're curious about it, we'll go dig it out for you. We're talking about stress in general, and this is a lot of the times the reasons why we would do something like practicing mindfulness, trying to de-stress, right? This whole idea of self-care is this mental, emotional, and physical well-being, generally because we're all stressed out. And so the way that stress affects our body is that when our body is put into a stressful environment, a stressful position, is it tells our brain, hey, we're stressed out, and our brain says, okay, body react this way. Right? And it's this loop of how our brain and our body interact. So if you can tell either your brain or your body to stop acting in a stressed manner, it can help relieve a lot of the different things that we talked about, the physical, the emotional, the mental symptoms that are associated with stress. Mindfulness is just one way of doing that. We also have this concept of guided breathing. We breathe 24 hours a day, and I know that because you're sitting here right now, right? I know you know how to breathe. Guided breathing or intentional breathing is this concept that you're going to take some time to breathe. Maybe that's 1, 2, 3 in, and then 4, 5, 6 out. I really like this geometric shape because it's on a 6 count or so. And it's super soothing, I really like it. And again, a lot of the benefits of breathing, or this idea of intentional breathing or guided breathing, is it can help reduce the stress in our body by lowering our heart rate, our blood pressure, maybe some of the tension that we're feeling. And it's something that we do every day, all the time. And it takes 6 seconds to take one breath, and that can be an intentional breath, right? Maybe you want to take 3 deep breaths before a presentation, before a test, right? Trying to relieve some of these stressors and things like that. Maybe you get into the habit of doing this continuously. Now you're breathing more intentional and more regulated, and those deeper breaths and those slower breaths, right? Throughout. So again, a lot of cool research around breathing. How many of us have heard of Wim Van Hoff, the Iceman? All right, we got one hand. Cool. Maybe a couple, right? This guy from the Netherlands, Norwegian guy, somewhere around there. He does a bunch of stuff with cold therapy, which is also cool. But he does a bunch of breathing exercises. If you're curious, you come up on YouTube. It's really amazing what he does. He's worked with some researchers as well to try and show the power of breathing. Some quick things about him that he's done and that he attributes to breathing is, and he did this with training other people to do it, they put a toxin into his body, and through controlled breathing, he was able to have no physical effect that could be determined strictly just through breathing. This is verified through research. He trained a couple of other people how to do this as well through this just regulated breathing technique, and the researchers were astounded, right? They're trying to figure out, is it a genetic thing from him, or is it a learned behavior that we can all learn? He's done things like run a 100-mile marathon with no water, strictly just through breathing and mental fortitude, right? All these different things. He's an amazing human being, does a lot of cool stuff that I find really fun, so that's why I recommend him. There's a bunch of other people on the interwebs that also do cool stuff, and if you're looking for guided breathing podcasts or things like that, they exist, and they can be really helpful. So wrapping up here in our last couple of minutes before I hit the resources is self-care is conceptually this idea of doing something that you enjoy, right? Realistically, that's what it looks like. Carve out some time for your passions, watching a movie, crafting, going on a hike. Maybe you are like me and you like to do virtual museum tours that people did during the pandemic or different things like that. There's a lot of really cool stuff out there, right? But bottom line is do something that you enjoy, right? Take care of your health, physical, physiological, mental, emotional health, right? Sleeping, eating, all those different things that we talked about that can be beneficial, whether they be in that idea of self-care or not. And I'll have caps in the resource up here in a second. And lastly, this idea of practicing empathy, right? Empathy being, we all have a shared experience that we can draw on, and we can be empathetic towards others, right? So be kind to yourself, be kind to others. Be kind about when and where you practice self-care. It's especially relevant if you live with other people, right? Maybe it's music, but your roommate's trying to study, right? Be compassionate about it. It's a choice, right? It's a free choice that you can make, but it's still a choice, right? So try and practice compassion and empathy in your forms of self-care. So a couple of resources. If you're interested, you can text @stress to this number here. You get weekly interactive text messages. They're fun. It's a check-in stress, like on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you at? Sometimes it's good to get a little reminder, a little self-check. You're like, oh, I'm at a 8 today. Okay, cool, I'm super stressed out. And then you get another little tip or potential helpful thing with that. I want to leave you guys with this, these ideas of self-care strategies. I know we've gone over a bunch that as we've gone through this and talked about. Are there any up here, looking at this list, that you want to add to your self-care regimen? Either ideas that are up here, ideas that you've heard from your other classmates, things like that. You're like, hey, that's really good. I like that. I want to start doing that. So feel free to share if you have one or two. It's also okay if you don't. Like I said, we covered a pretty good basis of different self-care strategies. Cool. My goal is to always get 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night. That's been a thing that I've tried to do for all 6 years that I've been here at WSU. Right, my undergrad and my master's.
Tell me your secrets, man.
Put yourself to bed and try to fall asleep. There's a lot of tips and tricks for actually falling asleep, and breathing is a great way of doing that, as well as trying to relax your muscles and things like that.
Stop looking at screens a couple hours before you go to bed.
Yeah, there's a lot of research that shows that screens are really, really bad for mental and emotional health, and blue light versus orange light, all those different tests with that. So using technology before bed is not super recommended for sleep. And there's a bunch of research that backs that up as well. Skip through that just to hit the last couple of resources here in case you are curious or want them. We have CAPS, which is Counseling and Psych Services. You get 1 free consultation and 6 free visits with them per semester. You get 25 over your entire college career. If they can't cover whatever it is that you want to talk about or what have you, they can point you to other resources in the community that can cover that basis. I know there's some Toulouse advising groups and different things like that for Toulouse communities. You also have Cougar Health Services, which is your general health type things, etc. You have the Academic Success and Career Services. They do a whole bunch of different stuff around academic success or career success, things like that. They're a great resource as well. We also have the Multicultural Student Services. They do a whole bunch of different things there on campus strictly to provide more specialized resources for the ethnic minorities that are on campus that some of these resources might not cover as in-depth or as broadly. That looks like community events, peer mentorship, other career opportunities in some of the other things that are more ethnographically related, different things like that. So if you want to dive into the resources around there as well, they're a great resource for that. And then, little plug for ourselves, health promotion. We do education prevention strategies for alcohol and drugs. We do mental health promotion in the forms of mental health first aid training as well as Campus Connect. And then we have a bunch of different violence prevention workshops as well as our life skill series, which this is one of them. The other ones are stress management, sleep, mindfulness, and time management. This is Office of the Dean of Students, in case you're ever curious, but nobody ever is. This is our email. If you're curious, you can reach out, ask questions. I really appreciate all of your time, the interaction. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully this was beneficial for all of you. Like I said, if you have any questions, you can reach out. I'll stay for a little bit if you want to ask me questions. But thank you so much for your time, and have a great rest of your day.